Now, back when I began mountain biking in 2011, I just kind of used to huck and pray on every single ride, unsure of what technique was or how to implement it. My close friends referred to me as Crash Tina or Nars Tina because I literally would crash all the time. I had next to zero self-preservation, and honestly speaking, it's crazy I didn't get more injured in those earlier days learning the sport. Truthfully speaking, I have more than enough scars to tell the tales. Now today, I want to look back at my riding over the last 10 plus years, from complete beginner to World Cup level enduro racer, and share some things I've learned along the way. Maybe you'll recognize some of these issues. Perhaps you've even had similar problems. Now, with today's video, I want to help you and others overcome the same blocks that were holding me back. Now, I only started mountain biking at the age of 22, and I still feel very fortunate that I found the sport when I did. Regardless though, I always kind of felt like I was late to the party. Now, I learned early on that repetition does wonders for building experience and honing my craft, really enabling me to find what works and what didn't. With that in mind, even great tips will need to be refined with practice. So let's dig in. Now, about a year into mountain biking, the first real pivotal moment occurred to me. First and foremost, I realized I needed to have more stability and confidence. Now, before this, I was just kind of awkward, gangly on the bike, really upright and tall, not exactly feeling one with the machine that I was piloting. I realized I needed to get lower, especially on the front wheel, and just generally have my bike fit me better. Setting up the cockpit of your bike is one of the less expensive setup changes, and it can make a huge difference. Now, a good set of alloy bars with the correct width and rise can make a huge difference in your comfort. We went really deep on this in another video, and I will link to that below so you can get a little nerdy with it if you want. After riding for a little while, I noticed I had a different technique when it came to descending than a lot of the other Whistler shredders that I lined up against at the local races. Now, for some reason, they were not abiding to the get back advice I had been given, and instead they were much more forward on their bike, with their head somewhere over their stem, not looking down at the top tube. In comparison, my arms were outstretched. I had no control over the front of the bike, and my weight was way behind the rear wheel. Things really started to click for me while completing my level 1 certification with PMBI. Prior to that, tasks that I really struggled with, like finding stability and confidence on my bike, moving around comfortably while also knowing the neutral position to get back to, helped set the correct foundation to continue building on. Specifically focusing on bending the elbows now that I had the correct setup, and maintaining a position on the bike where my center of gravity was close to the center of the bike, allowed me to move more in sync with the bike over technical terrain. Now that my arms and legs were in a more athletic stance, I could then make more dynamic movements and essentially had some built-in suspension, using my limbs to absorb those big hits and compressions. Additionally, I learned to use my extremities to apply more or less pressure when needed. Envision cornering, for instance. Instead of falling into the corner, I could now stand up a little bit taller and stronger, fighting those forces. By angling the bike and not leaning over with it or applying too much pressure in any one way, changes in trail direction became a lot less like hard, awkward work, and in turn became more fun and playful, while even being in more control. The next pivotal moment that I can really pinpoint came in 2014 for me. Now, I know this seems like slow progress, but at the time, I still felt so green compared to my friends that had been mountain biking their entire lives. The big breakthrough might not seem like much, but actually it was a huge deal at the time for me, and that was my feet. And it was all about their placement on the pedals. Unknowingly at the time, my foot placement affected my overall position on the bike, and as a result, my technique. Now, learning to specifically drop my heels more while descending and shift my weight on the bike in corners allowed for better bike body separation. Now, these were things I was already doing, but to a much lesser extent, and I finally realized why they were so important and the gains that could be made, like better traction and control. Suddenly, I felt like I could almost multiply my body weight's effect on the bike when it came to stability, as well as really give me something to drive against when pushing through the bike in turns. Now, it's easy when you know how, but if you were to start mountain biking today and wanted to progress quickly, I would really focus on basic foot and body position. Those two things are going to set you up really well for refining more sophisticated techniques down the line. Learning to mountain bike on flat pedals is what I would personally recommend, and swapping to clipless pedals in 2016 isn't something I initially planned on doing, but it did solve one major problem I had back then, and that was bouncing on my pedals, and as a result, torn up shins. After making the swap, I personally found that being attached to my pedals led to much more control in rough terrain. I believe that both pedals have their benefits, of course, but for me at the time, switching to clipless pedals really allowed me to take my riding up a level. While it might seem obvious to some, having never tried them at the time, I was quite surprised at the greater level of control, especially when climbing. And I don't mean in regards to pedaling efficiency. Clipless pedals allowed me to adapt where and when I put pressure when pedaling. And from then on, the rear pedal didn't need to have heavy pressure on it all the time in order to keep that foot from flying off. This makes a real difference when we're scrambling up technical climbs where sometimes our suspension can kick us a little bit when we're going on and off the power. I could also unweight the bike more effectively and bring it up and over obstacles a bit easier, and then I could focus on the trail instead of wondering what my feet were doing. Don't be fooled though, it took me a long time to get to the level of comfort and confidence where my bike felt like an extension of my body again. Regardless of which pedals you choose to run, one thing is for certain, and that is the need to apply pressure with both our hands and our feet, particularly when it comes to pumping, jumping, even obstacles like rock rolls. With every calculated move, applying correct timing and pressure control enabled me to feel and therefore look less awkward on the bike. Things like unweighting the bike going up a roller, pumping with pressure in our hands and our feet on the backside of the roller. They felt more natural, and turns out they were much more effective. Similar breakthroughs happened with jumping as well. With more control and awareness, pushing evenly into my suspension on the takeoff of a jump to then absorb the bike in the air and nose in on the landing were becoming easier over time with repetition, allowing me to go bigger every season. My final example, rock rolls. Still intimidating at times, they did become a lot safer in my own riding when practicing pressure control and neutral body position, including looking ahead, heels dropped, brakes modulating, and finally knowing when to release and let the bike ride out the end, absorbing any compressions along the way. Now with all that said, component upgrades, skill development aside, I learned that finding a supportive group to ride with, or at least one close pal, can really enhance the journey that is mountain biking. Surrounding myself with people I truly enjoy being around, people that I look up to or maybe even want to ride like, that has really enhanced my riding techniques. The thing I really, truly love about mountain biking is we never top out. There is always room for growth to keep us engaged. Whether it's skill or technique-based, traveling to a new riding destination, or knocking off a bucket list trip or goal, there is room to dream and continue loving this sport. Thank you so much for watching the video today and learning how my riding and techniques have changed over the last decade or so. If you think I missed anything or you've got some hot tips or techniques that you want to share, make sure to throw those in the comments below.